Flop Warning is back for a second episode. After a weekend loaded with drama and intrigue in men's college hoops, we're here to break it all down. I'm Zion Brown, and joining me for this episode is Cole Nobby and Luke Donovan. Guys, what a weekend it was.
Ton of great matchups this weekend. I'll start with Houston at Kansas. I mean, that was the one I was most looking forward to. Top 10 matchup in Allen Fieldhouse. Kansas offense blew my mind. I mean, Houston, number one in defensive efficiency, according to KenPom. Still number one overall, actually, even after the weekend. And Kansas shoots almost 70% from the field, puts up 78 points. I mean, but Kansas, I gave them a lot more credit after watching that game that I had this year.
Yeah, I think for me, Kevin McCullough and Hunter Dickinson as a duo are one of the best in college basketball, if not the best, and they excelled. It was awesome to watch.
Yeah, I mean, watching this game, the way Kansas offense just dissected the Houston defense every time down the floor really stood out to me. And I looked at it and I just said, Kansas, they're big men. McCullough not necessarily a big man, but a wing, a forward. Dickinson, obviously a big man. KJ Adams, they did really well against those traps and those blitzes that Houston sends, and they did a good job against it. And I think the fact that Kansas came into this game, I believe they were 2-point underdogs. I think Bill Self probably relished in the fact that they were underdogs. But he saw that. I think that gave him an extra motivation. Now, obviously, they're already playing a top 5 team in the country, but just even more motivation. Like, hey, guys, we're at home. This is Phog Allen Fieldhouse, and we're underdogs. Like, there's no way we should, be underdogs, and they play like a team that should not have been underdogs.
Yeah, it goes back to good offense can sometimes beat good defense, and I think that it's as simple as that for me in the Kansas win.
So it was a weekend full of top 10 games. Right after that one, we saw Duke at UNC. Once again, the home team came out on top. 93-84 was the victory for the Tar Heels. Armando Bacot might have had his best game this season, 25 points, 10 rebounds. He was joined by Harrison Ingram, 21 points and 13 boards. And it was just really the Tar Heels were better from start to finish basically in this one.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of the classic Duke-UNC matchups, and frankly, Duke just struggled to shoot the ball. I mean, I think both teams had good games. You had Jared McCain for Duke, the freshman, go for 23. It was a high-scoring game, but 5 for 19 from the perimeter is not going to get it done when you're an underdog on the road.
Yeah, and I think this is the game that you wanted if you're a UNC fan. All year, it had been R.J. Davis. You came into this year with average to high expectations, and they've completely surpassed that. And it's been R.J. Davis every time in a timeout. And now you lose a game to Georgia Tech that you shouldn't have. You come back in a rivalry game, and Bacot puts up 25 and 10. That's exactly what you need from an All-American caliber big man. This game was awesome, just as we expected. High scoring. Jared McCain played great for Duke. I mean, as a young freshman coming to that rivalry for the first time. I think Duke, they only dropped a couple spots in the AP poll as they should, and UNC sticks right at 3 as they should. I think those are both top 10 teams in the country.
Yeah, looking at the matchup of this and the result, I think it solidified the fact that North Carolina is the best team in the ACC. I know they had that really bad slip-up against Georgia Tech, maybe looking forward and looking ahead to the Duke game too much, but they're now 10-1 in ACC play, 18-4. This is truly a great North Carolina team, kind of what we thought they would be last year when they came into the season ranked first overall in the nation and then didn't make the tournament at all. This is a great team. As for Duke goes, I think it's a pretty good team, but still I'm not ready to call this Duke team great or even really good, really. This is a pretty good team. They're obviously going to be a tournament team and probably a top 3 or 4 seed in the NCAA tournament. But I think North Carolina is a class ahead of Duke, and Duke is probably a class ahead of everybody else in the ACC as well. That's kind of just the way that conference looks this year. But I was really impressed by Bacot and the defense they played. They were just ready for anything Duke did, and Bacot proved that even though he's had I don't want to say a down season, but he's taken a back seat a bit to R.J. Davis this year. He still proved that when you need him to go get a double-double, 25 points, 10 boards, he can do so.
Yeah, I mean, it's UNC being UNC. I'm excited to see what UNC can do in the tournament because I think they have the experience in the guards. They have Bacot, who's an older guy. I think they're going to be a team to watch when it gets to like the Elite 8, Final 4. I think they're one of the few teams that can beat absolutely anybody.
Yeah, the Tar Heels now have won 11 of their last 12. Once again, just a great team they've got there, now up to number 3 in the country. So the other big game, this one, once again, we got these 3 huge top 10 games. None of them really came down to the wire in the fashion that we expected them to. And this one, Tennessee at Kentucky. Tennessee just went in there and dominated, scored 103 points at Kentucky to win 103-92. Despite Rob Dillingham going off for the Wildcats 35 points. It was still Tennessee. All their starters were in double figures. Zakai Ziegler, experienced guard, 26 points, 13 assists. And Kentucky finishes the week 0-2 after that loss.
I think that was the best team win of the weekend for the Volunteers. Dalton Knecht, who normally leads them with pretty much 20 points a game, didn't really play exceptional against Kentucky, and the rest of the team was monstrous. And it was unbelievable to watch. I think that was the best team win in college basketball this year, especially for Kentucky, without Knecht doing what he normally does.
Yeah, I completely agree. I thought Tennessee, if they were going to outscore Kentucky, Knecht had to have a 30, 35-point game like he had this year. And Zakai Ziegler got a lot of hate for not having the stats that he probably should to be listed on that Bob Cousy Award watch list. And he comes out and puts up 26 and 13. I mean, that was a game where if you told me that Knecht only had the points that he had, I would have thought Kentucky won by 15, 20 points. Yeah, that was a big win for Kentucky. They are a top 5 team.
I want to save some of my Kentucky talk for one of our segments later, but I will say this: the defense has struggled. I mean, you look at this Tennessee team. Granted, we know South Carolina is good now; they're finally ranked, but they scored 59 points at home against South Carolina on Tuesday, and then a few days later they go to Kentucky and surpass the century mark. That just shows that the Kentucky defense is all out of sorts. Josiah Jordan-James, also like Zakai Ziegler, he had 26 points as well. I mean, that Kentucky team, you could tell they're talented, but there's still a lot to iron out, to figure out for the Wildcats. Once again, I will get to that specifically a bit more later, but that really showed in that game on Saturday night. Now, the one last top 10 matchup that we had talked about last week was Purdue going to Wisconsin, and the Boilermakers stayed on track, won that one by 6 points. So two tight games for Purdue. This one was a 75-69 final. 2 tight games for Purdue last week. They escaped past Northwestern in overtime at home. Then they go to Wisconsin to get the big win. The Badgers, 3 of 19 from beyond the arc. Just a pitiful performance from outside for them, and it led to Purdue getting another win in Big Ten play.
Yeah.
Sorry, no. Yeah, that's what when you're playing Purdue and they have Zach Edey in the middle, you have to shoot the ball well. And that's what Northwestern did at Mackey. They almost pulled it off, had a chance there at the end of regulation. And if you're Wisconsin, who has a better inside game than Northwestern, can put up some points inside, luckily. But yeah, 3 for 19 the perimeter. I don't think they hit a 3 the entire second half.
They did not, you're right.
You're not beating Purdue doing that.
Yeah, I mean, AJ Storr, your best player in big-time games, your big-time player has to play well. AJ Storr, 4 for 15 from the field. That is not how you beat a team that is one of the best in the nation like Purdue. And it was just a pretty simple game for Purdue. They were doing their thing, which is what they do time and time again. 42-29 in the rebound battle. They led for the last 30 minutes of the game. So even though it was only a 6-point win, they were in control the whole time.
I got to tip my hat to Lance Jones in this game. You mentioned A.J. Storr, how badly he struggled. That was because of the defense that Lance Jones played on him throughout the night. Jones played 34 minutes and not only was great defensively, but he led the team in scoring. He had 20 points, 6 rebounds, 3 assists, and did not turn the ball over. Yeah, I mean, that's a perfect game. You're playing great defense. You score 20. You're passing a bit. You're rebounding, and you don't give the ball away. That is exactly why Purdue brought Lance Jones in this season, to give them that extra guard they can trust and they can rely on in big games. And he just shut down Storr, despite A.J. Storr being 6 inches tall. A.J. Storr is a 6'7", wing type of player. Lance Jones can play up, but playing to a guy 6 inches taller than you and defending him the way he did, I mean, he was on it. So Lance Jones, to me, he's the MVP of that game for Purdue. Zach Edey, just 18 points. I know, that's. I mean, how dare he only score 18?
Below average.
So that wasn't his strongest game we've seen him play. And Lance Jones stepped up. All the guards really played well and had key moments in that game for this Purdue team that is clearly one of the top 2 teams in the country. It's a take your pick kind of thing between Purdue and UConn right now. UConn had a great weekend as well, winning against St. John's this weekend. But this Purdue team just showing once again why they're so dominant. So now, it's the flop warning. It is time for our flop of the week. Cole, I want to start with you. What is your flop of the week from this past week in college hoops?
Well, I'll push away a little bit from Wisconsin because I know, top 10 matchup, you get beat by arguably the best team in the country. That's a rough win. But I'll say that Kentucky is probably the flop of the week. I'll talk about South Carolina a little bit later, how they jumped into the polls. But Kentucky, you can't lose 2 games in the same week and continue to be a top 10 team. You get blown out by South Carolina. on the road, conference games happen, but you get blown out. And then you let Kentucky walk in on Saturday and put up over 100 points in Rupp Arena. I mean, that's not something that Kentucky can live with as we get towards tournament time and continue to be one of the best teams in the country.
Yeah, and for me, my flop of the week, it goes back to Wisconsin, but more specifically Stephen Crowell, one of their big men. And it's not necessarily just the loss to Purdue, because that's an okay loss. You can afford that loss. Purdue, very good team. It's the loss before that to Nebraska, 80-72. Stephen Crowell, who averages nearly 12 points a game, their third leading scorer, 1 point against Nebraska. They didn't play well. A.J. Storr had, I believe, 26, and he was the only Badger playing well against Nebraska the game before Purdue. So if you look at it, let's say Wisconsin's looking ahead to Purdue, then you have to win that game. After you lose to Nebraska, you can't afford to lose 2 in a row. You got to win at least one of those games. And now they're, I believe, tied for second, but behind Illinois in the Big Ten after being first last weekend.
And Wisconsin up by 16 points in that game. I was getting ready to turn it off. I was like, wow, this Wisconsin team looks the part now. Going on the Nebraska, we know, are great at home, that they upset everybody at home. And I saw Wisconsin up 16 as they get to the half. They kept showing that stat on Big Ten Network of they were like 200-something and 0 when leading by 15-plus points at the half. And then here comes Nebraska. That was 2 devastating losses for their season and Big Ten title hopes, really.
Right, because that's a Wisconsin team that you looked at a couple weeks ago and said, okay, nobody really thought they were better than Purdue, but you say, if everything shakes right, they could still, maybe win a share of the Big Ten. And they're not out of that now either, but it becomes much more difficult after this week where you lose to Purdue and you lose that game that you should not have lost against Nebraska. Cole, I'm with you with the flop of the week. I got to go with Kentucky. I mean, the 3-point loss at home to Florida in overtime on Wednesday. Follow that up against the number 5 team in the country, Tennessee, on Saturday and lose that game by 11. Once again, giving up 103 points to Tennessee. It's just not good enough. And the Wildcats, look, they are the most talented team in the country. You have Rob Dillingham, you have Reed Shepherd, you have Reeves, all those guys. They're good. But they are nowhere near the best team in the country. And it's because of their defense. Their defense is terrible. They've dropped to 102 the last time I checked in adjusted efficiency on defense in KenPom. It's a horrendous, truly a horrendous defense that Kentucky has there. And that's, to me, that falls on John Calipari. I'm not, as anti-Calipari as a lot of people are, but right now you can't tell me he's doing a good enough job getting these guys to buy in and lock in defensively. They've now lost 3 straight. Now they have missed DJ Wagner in all 3 of those games. And I think he's a pretty good defender. So that may be part of it, but still you lose all 3 of those games and you're now 2-4 in quad 1 games as Kentucky. This is a team that has a talent to be, one of the best 8 to 10 teams in the country, but right now they certainly are not that.
Yeah, post 100 in KenPom in defensive efficiency. I agree, like guys said last week, that defense doesn't necessarily win you championships anymore. It's more offense, but over 100 in defense efficiency, that will lose you games regardless of how good your offense is.
Absolutely. So, I mean, this Kentucky team, they've got a lot of soul searching to do here, basically, is the point for them. Once again, they're talented enough to win the national championship, but they do not play well enough to win the national championship. This week, they've got Vanderbilt going to Vanderbilt on Tuesday. That is a game that if they lose, sirens off, full panic mode if they find a way to lose to Vanderbilt. Then they go out of conference, just one of those oddly scheduled games. It'll be fun to watch between them and Gonzaga. Both teams, especially Gonzaga, will be desperate because we'll talk about them in a second, but they basically need to win that game against Kentucky to have an actual at-large case for the NCAA tournament. So moving on from the flop of the week, we'll go to our fab of the week. This time, Luke, I'll start with you. Who was your, whether it's a player, a team, whatever, who's your fab of the week?
It's Marquette for me. They had an 85-80 win over Villanova where Tyler Colquitt had 32, and then they followed it up with another great performance where Cam Jones had 31. Marquette, they can shoot the ball. They are, I think, one of the best shooting from the perimeter teams in the country. They showed that they're very good, and I think if you have multiple guys who can give you 30 one night, when it comes to March and you're playing 2-3 times a week, that's when those games matter. And if someone's giving you 30, you're going to be in a good chance to win games.
Yeah, love Tyler Kolek. I mean, I think he's arguably the best point guard in the country. Marquette is a very good team, much like a lot of teams this year, have a ton of good wins and have some random losses that just look really bad for no reason. My fab of the week is South Carolina. We just got the update that they're number 15 in the AP poll this week. They beat Kentucky on January 23rd. They beat Tennessee on the road, giving Tennessee their first loss at home this year. They've had 5 straight, and they are tied for second in the SEC. You have Alabama at 1, at 8-1, I believe, and there's South Carolina right there with Auburn for second. So they're only 44th in KenPom right now. Strength of schedule is a big reason for that. But as they get down the stretch, if they're still top 3, top 2 in the SEC, you're looking at a pretty good seed for a South Carolina team that hasn't been good the past few years.
Yeah, with South Carolina, for me, I get, you mentioned their low 44 KenPom rating. I get the fact that they did not schedule well out of conference, and that's for a reason. They weren't good last year, so that's what you kind of do when you don't play well one season. You temper down the schedule for out of conference, but they just keep winning. They keep beating these teams that I have a friend that goes there, and he's like, yeah, this week's probably the week we go 0-2, and they just don't. They just keep winning these games. So until they stop, I mean, I consider them one of the best 20, 25 teams in the country. They're finally ranked today as they should be. So if they just keep going, it'll be hard. If they, finish 3rd or 4th in that really strong top of the SEC, it'll be hard for you to look at their resume come March and say this shouldn't be, at least like a top 5 or 6 seed in the NCAA tournament. For my fab of the week, I actually went with a player. This is Butler forward Jamil Telfort, who had a really strong week. We didn't get to the game that Butler played against Creighton on Friday, but they took down Creighton in that game, and he had 26 points in that one. Also had 22 points and 11 rebounds the week before in a double overtime game against Villanova last Saturday. This is a guy that came over from Northeastern. Thad Matta just had to completely turn over this entire Butler roster, and Telfort is having a really good stretch here. During Butler's 4-game winning streak, he's a big part of why they're on that streak, and to me, he just deserves his props and recognition for what he's been able to do as of late for the Bulldogs. So now, we talk about a few of our mid-major games, the big games that happened this week. On the mid-major side, we will start with the game that happened on Saturday, San Diego State and Utah State in the Mountain West. San Diego State won this one 81-67. It was a back-and-forth first half, but the San Diego State was able to just take it home from there. Jaden Ledee, 17 points, 9 boards, and a big win for San Diego State.
Yeah, this is the San Diego State team that obviously was really good last year and made it to the national championship. Nobody was stopping UConn last year, but this team this year is very similar in the way they play, that they rush you defensively, they can score offensively. They're just very compact on both sides of the ball. And like you said, Ledee, 17 points. Jay Paul, 16 points. Parrish, 14 points. They have guys that can do it. They're not one-sided. They're not relying on one player. So, this San Diego State team is looking to be another top 20, 25 team, get a top 4 or 5 seed, and could easily make a run like they did last year.
Yeah, I mean, they just, I believe on the new AP poll, they're 24th now after that win. I think Utah State fell from 17 to 20 or 21. But both of these teams are going to be in the tournament. Both these teams are very good. Utah State, they didn't shoot the 3-point ball well enough to win this game, and that's what San Diego State wants to make happen. They're going to be aggressive on defense. They're going to bog you down. 26% from the perimeter for Utah State. That's not going to beat a team like San Diego State, who's very locked down on defense, and you're not going to get a lot of good opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, San Diego State, you mentioned it. I mean, it's all defense for the Aztecs. Defense, defense, defense. They play that way, and they win that way. That's how they got to the national championship, although it was an ugly game, kind of expected when they lost that to UConn. But, they want to just defend their tails off, and that's what they did against Utah State. Utah State, you mentioned it, fell a few spots, dropped to 22 after that loss. Still above San Diego State at 24 in the AP poll, so that could probably be debated. But you said it, that was a big win for San Diego State to get the Mountain West this year. Is just a bloodbath. So many good teams in that conference. And San Diego State right now getting that win kind of maybe separates them from the rest of the pack. So now we go to the West Coast Conference. We were talking about Gonzaga shortly earlier. They lost to St. Mary's. St. Mary's now on a 10-game win streak as they beat Gonzaga in Gonzaga 64-62 in this one. Aiden Mahaney, 20 points. He's been just phenomenal in his 2 seasons there at St. Mary's. And now Gonzaga drops to 16-6, 7-2 in the West Coast Conference. And might not be a tournament team for the first time since 98.
Yeah, I mean, they've lost a couple. They lost to San Francisco, who I think they're tied for second in the West Coast with now. But obviously, San Francisco wins the tiebreaker. St. Mary's is the best team in the West Coast Conference, and I don't think it's necessarily that close this year. Gonzaga certainly, I think without the big guys that they've had, Drew Timme not being there, I think it's a little bit harder for some of these guards to be so explosive offensively, and that's where it's really hurting them. St. Mary's, we know they're going to play super slow basketball. It's going to be very slow-paced game, and that's what it was. And St. Mary's makes the shots they need to down the stretch and does enough to come away with the win.
And St. Mary's has to be, I don't want to say underdog team of the year because they've been good these past couple of years, but being 18-6, 9-0 in the conference, no one thought that they would outmatch Gonzaga the way they did. And this Gonzaga team up to 11, I think, at one point in the AP poll early in the year, and has just completely fell off through there. They don't lose at home. Fans were throwing stuff on the court because probably just in frustration. I mean, St. Mary's is on a look right now to be a top, 4 or 5 seed. And Gonzaga's on a look right now where they don't have the wins to say, hey, we're good enough to be in the tournament like they have, when they've gone to Maui and won the Maui Classic, like they have when they've won the West Coast Conference with ease. They don't have the wins really to say that they're in the tournament right now. And that would just be astonishing.
Gonzaga now 0-5 in quad one. So, I mean, it's hard to look at a team that's 0-5 in quad one and really make a legitimate argument that they deserve to have an at-large case for the NCAA tournament. They are 3-1 in quad two, but we mentioned it. They'll play Portland on Wednesday. That should be a big win for Gonzaga. And then they'll have that big game where they go to Kentucky. And, man, they need that one. If they don't win that one, the at-large case probably just disappears for Gonzaga. And you say, you're not making the NCAA tournament unless you win the conference tournament. But without that, this team has just not done enough this year. It's a much different team. You mentioned it, no Drew Timme. It's Graham Ike and Ryan Nembhard who have come over and they've both been solid, but probably not as good as they were expected to be. And so that has hurt the Zags. And now they're close to, once again, it's been since 98. They've made the tournament every year. And for the first time since Mark Few has been there, this could be the year that they miss it. So we'll see with that one. And now, this was my favorite game of the weekend. I caught the last 10 or 15 minutes of this one. Drake at Indiana State was the big one on Saturday night, going on at the same time as Duke and UNC. And Indiana State came up with the win on that one. It was 75-67, the final. It was tied at 67 all. And Indiana State ended the game on an 8-0 run to win again. 20 wins now, 20-3, 11-1 in the MVC. And this ISU team is just so fun to watch, Cole.
Yeah, this team is really good. If you haven't watched Indiana State, like the guys talked about last week, please go watch them. They are very good. Like you said, Robbie Avila, 20 points. Conwell, 21 points. I mean, this is a team that they move the ball so efficiently. Coaching is great. They don't turn the ball over a lot. And 20 wins. We were talking earlier today that they could almost get an at-large bid even if they don't win the Missouri Valley, because they've been one of the quickest teams to 20 wins. They don't have any bad losses. I mean, if they push this lead out in the Missouri Valley by a couple games, they could be easily a team that you're just like, yeah, they're in. They don't need to win that tournament.
Yeah, I mean, their one loss in conference is to Drake, who they just beat. So they correct that loss. So they're up to 11-1, and they're very young and they're very talented. And I would love to see them make the tournament personally, because they're just a great story all around. They beat their third place team in the Missouri Valley twice already this year. So looking at the rest of their schedule, they're going to be a pretty heavy favorite in a lot of these games, especially the ones that are at home. And they could make a case for an at-large bid, but I think as of right now, they still have to win the conference tournament.
And speaking of them being very young, this is a team that I envision, regardless of how the season plays out, next year scheduling some games where, teams will pay them to come into their place, and you could very easily get upset by an Indiana State team that is going to have a really good ending in this year, and they could be very good next year.
Yeah, you mentioned it when you said, Luke, that they'll probably be favored. According to KenPom, they will be favored in every game going forward for the rest of the regular season. I think their hardest test will be when they go to Southern Illinois in a couple weeks on February 17th. That one could be a tough one, but if they can drop just one more, I think they have the leeway to drop one more game. But if they lose 2 to 3, then it gets really dicey. If they can finish the season here and win 7 of their last 8 and lose to either Drake or Bradley in the MVC tournament, I think they're good. If they lose 2 or 3 games and then they lose in the MVC tournament, you cross your fingers. But this Indiana State team, I want to see this team so badly in the NCAA tournament. I think everybody does. any college basketball fan that's paid attention this year realizes this team can shoot the lights out the ball. The last I checked, I think all 5 of their starters are at like 37% or above from 3, which in college basketball, you just don't see that. That's insane. They can shoot the lights out the ball. They play well. They get open looks for their guys, and they are just really fun to watch. So that is what we have. Those are the 3 mid-major games we decided to highlight this week. Now for this week, let's look ahead to a few games. What are you guys looking forward to this week?
I think for me, it starts with the Big 12. You got Texas Tech. Baylor has 2 big games this week, first off, and their first one's against Texas Tech. Both teams are 5-3 in the conference. They're tied for 3rd, basically. Baylor has the tiebreakers right now. Texas Tech lost a couple times last week, though, so it's a must-win game for them. On the road at Baylor, not going to be any easy feat for them. I think that's where the weekend starts for me, college basketball-wise.
Yeah, the Big 12 is a gauntlet every year. We looked at the Big 12 this past week as the Houston-Kansas game of the week. I'm looking more to the SEC. Like we mentioned earlier, the top of the SEC is really good. And Alabama leads right now at 8-1. Auburn's right behind them at 7-2. This is a rematch. They just played in Tuscaloosa a couple weeks ago. Auburn got out to an early lead. Alabama comes back. Sears, obviously the catalyst for Alabama, averaging over 20 points a game. This will be a really interesting game. If Auburn can come back and win this, and not the series up, then it's just a race to who's not going to drop one that they shouldn't the rest of the year. Auburn's 5 in KenPom right now. Alabama's 7. This is like as close of a game as you can really get.
That's the one. I'll talk about another too. But that's the one I'm looking forward to because both of these teams are like metric darlings right now. Despite you looking at the resume and saying, it's good. Like both these teams are clear-cut NCAA tournament teams. But you look at KenPom, you mentioned it. Auburn 5, Alabama 7. That does not line up with necessarily the AP rankings of what these teams have accomplished. Auburn's in a team that they've won most of their games, but then you look at it, their biggest games, pretty much their 3 biggest games they've played in this year, they've lost. That is the game at Alabama just a few weeks ago. That is the neutral site game to start the season against Baylor, which it's the very first game of the year, so it's not a big deal. And then I guess I wouldn't call the Mississippi State game one of their 3 biggest games so far this year, but probably one of the best opponents they've played, and they lost that game a couple weeks ago. So this Auburn team is really good. They blow out so many teams. That's why their metrics are so good, is because they do take care, outside of the Appalachian State loss, they take care of business against these lower level teams in the SEC and in other power conferences. But you look at them and you say, okay, at some point you have to prove you can win a big game for me to actually believe that you're the 5th best team in the country like KenPom says you are. So this weekend this week rather, it's a Wednesday game, whether they can do that against Alabama in that game. And then you mentioned it, the 2 big games for Baylor. They'll go to Kansas coming up this weekend, and once again, Kansas will be favored in this one, I would assume, to win at home. But we'll see what they do if they can recover and respond from that huge win against Houston. And say, okay, let's go back again and win another huge one. Do we have anything to say about IU at Purdue? I mean, I know it's IU at Purdue, but like, what reason do we have to believe this game will be close?
I think if you're an IU fan, the only reason that you would believe this game to be close is the rivalry factor. The fact that Purdue is maybe getting a little big head, Matt Painter's not known to do that, or that Trey Galloway said in the post-game press conference after they got beat by 20 at home that we would be ready for him next time. The spread is going to be 15 to 20 points. Any fan is going to pick, or any analyst, I should say, is going to pick Purdue to win by 15 or 20 points at Mackey. The place is going to be rocking. I think Purdue will be ready. I don't see IU getting within single digits.
Indiana shot well from the perimeter last time against Purdue, and they don't do that. So, yeah, I think Purdue walks all over them again.
Yeah, that's that. I mean, there's not much more to add about that one. So now it is time for our game balls / the player of the week. Cole, I'll start with you. Who do you have for your game ball this past week?
One of my 2 game balls has got to go to Tyler Kolek. You mentioned him earlier. Marquette, a team just like everybody else in the country besides UConn and Purdue that have randomly stumbled, randomly won big games. He had 32, 9, and 6 with a big win over Alabama on Tuesday. He had 17 and 8 on Saturday and another win. He shot over 50% in both games. I mean, just unreal stats. He's a stat stuffer. He can lead Marquette to a late run in the tournament. As much as teams this year have been, upset here, upset there, as much as Marquette team has been inconsistent, Tyler Kolek's a guy who could win you a Final Four.
What about you, Luke?
For me, I'm going to go to Arizona, Omar Ballo. I think he was great this week for Arizona. I think if you look at Miami's team last year with Norchad Omier, he plays in a very similar fashion. He's the 1 center. He can't shoot. He's not going to be out for 3. surrounded by great talent at the shooter position with guys like Caleb Love, Kashad Johnson. He had 18 and 13 and 22 and 13 this week against Stanford and Cal. 6 offensive rebounds against Cal for a team that's 8th in rebounding. And we talk about Arizona shooters all the time. He's the reason why they're 8th in rebounding, and that's a big stat. If you're out rebounding teams consistently, that puts you in a good spot to win games.
Yeah, my second game ball's got to go to Lance Jones. Purdue, right there, 1A, 1B, best team in the country. You talked about him earlier. Lance Jones is a guy who can get this team over the hump. Last year, Zach Edey was the guy, obviously, National Player of the Year, was averaging, 20 and 10 a game. And the guard play was the biggest factor. The game plan was if you can push Purdue's guards out, force them to create their own shot, they can't do it, you can win that game. Now this year with Lance Jones, he's only averaging 13 a game this year, but he had 26 on Wednesday, 20 on Saturday, and 2 of the biggest games on Purdue's schedule here in conference play. He can get Purdue over hump. Purdue got pushed into first place now. I think with a guy like Lance Jones that can take the pressure off the young guys of Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer, this is a Purdue team that no one is betting against to not win at all.
I mean, yeah, you know me. I already sang Lance Jones' praises in this podcast episode. I mean, I like watching that guy play so much. I mean, he's a fairly mistake-free basketball player. He's not electric. He's not going to get you 20 every game like he did against Wisconsin. But, I mean, he is a guy that I would take on my team any day. It doesn't really matter the team. He can fit in a lot of different type of schemes and type of teams. I'm a big Lance Jones fan. My game ball is going to go – I'm going back to the mid-major side of things for this one. DaRon Holmes, the Dayton center, who quietly, very quietly, has probably been the second or third best player in the country this season. Obviously, Zach Edey's number 1. I think RJ Davis still, I'd say, has been better than DaRon Holmes. But this is a guy that Holmes, this past week, put up 24 points, 12 rebounds, 4 assists against George Washington last Tuesday. Then follow that up on Friday with 34 points, 7 boards, and 4 blocks versus St. Bonaventure. And this is for a really good Dayton team that is going to be in the tournament. DaRon Holmes is a really one of the best players in the country. I hope the voters and people are listening. This guy needs to be a first-team All-American. If he's not, I may riot because DaRon Holmes is really freaking good, averaging 20 points and 8 boards, a couple of blocks as well this year, and even shooting 40% from 3 as a 6'10 center. And he doesn't shoot too many, but he takes enough where it's impressive. I think he's taken about 55 or 60 threes this year and has made 40% of them. He is the catalyst for this strong Dayton team that is going to have a chance to make the second weekend, I believe, in the NCAA tournament. They're 18-3. They've won 15 of their last 16 games. And DaRon Holmes is a guy that more people need to be paying attention to because he's one of the best centers in the country. I think he's going to declare – he's a junior now. I think he'll declare for the NBA draft and have a chance to be a first-round pick. He's a really good basketball player.
Well, it's back to me, and I got to go with Johnny Broome. Back to Auburn. We talked about him a lot, and he had 25 in the last game they had against Alabama. They lost, but this time they'll be at home, and this last week he was getting his rhythm. 16-11, 5 blocks against Vanderbilt. 15, 9 rebounds, 7 assists, 3 blocks against the Rebels from Ole Miss. He shot over 50% in the last 5 games from the field. He slapped Morgan Freeman on accident out of the way in that game against Ole Miss. They laughed about it now, and I thought that was funny. But I think for me, the key for this Auburn team is him. I mean, he is the heart and soul. He's their best guy, and he's going to have to win the game against Alabama coming up this next week.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Broome is a really good player. I saw it when they played Indiana, just how good he is. The Morgan Freeman situation, can we just pause and talk about that? How like much would your just soul drop? Like, I would be so afraid if I turned around and realized I just smacked away Morgan Freeman, one of the most accomplished and well-respected, not even just actors, just people in the world. And you turn around, you're like, oh my God, what did I just do? Like, that was just such a surreal moment. And it's just so funny. I think Morgan Freeman went to 2 Ole Miss games this week. So he's a big fan down there, but that was crazy.
That's what I was like, why is Morgan Freeman courtside at these Ole Miss games all of a sudden? I mean, Ole Miss is a team that has very much improved this year under Chris Beard, but I did not see Morgan Freeman sitting courtside grabbing players after balls go out of bounds. That was not on my list.
Yeah, I believe he lives in Mississippi. I don't know if he went to school there or if he just, decided to show up, but it is kind of weird just to see Morgan Freeman at Ole Miss games out of anything. What were you saying, Luke?
Broome was just so locked in, he didn't even realize, but this is why college basketball is so great. You never know who's going to be in the building. You're on the road, not expecting to see Morgan Freeman. So funny, so good for the sport.
All right, now we get to our last big segment. The one, Owen, our producer here, is getting the timer started. I want to start this one. This is the shot clock segment.
Go for it.
Those who didn't listen to the first, I'll explain. For those who didn't listen to the first episode we had last week, the shot clock segment is basically you get 30 seconds, a.k.a. a shot clock, to just rant. Go off about whatever you want to go off on, say whatever you need to say, and get it off your chest. So, Owen, you can start the timer right now. My shot clock, we have to shorten the end of games. It's getting ridiculous. We just talked about Butler Creighton. I watched the end of that game. It took 22 minutes. The last 3 minutes of Purdue, Wisconsin, I timed it because I was like, this is going to take forever. It took 27 minutes for 3.5 minutes of basketball to be played. It's ridiculous. All the reviews, the flagrant fouls, whatever we're trying to look at, the out of bounds calls, they are taking too long. We have to find a way in college hoops to shorten the end of games. It is out of hand. Please stop. All right, that's me. All right, that's what I had to get off my chest.
I like it.
I'll pass the floor. Cole,
Yeah,
I'll start with you here.
All right, I am ready. I want to talk about the Michigan State Spartans. This is a team that was ranked preseason number 4 in the country, supposed to win the Big Ten, supposed to go to a Final Four. They was getting everybody back, and they have subtly won 4 of their last 5 games, I believe, or 5 of their last 6, and they have a very easy schedule coming up. They are tied for 4th in the Big Ten right now. This is a Michigan State team that has the talent and the coach, obviously, to make a real run in the tournament, and they're not going to get a highest seed as they probably should in terms of how good they are, and they're going to upset a couple people come March.
Ooh, nice.
All right, we're doing well so far, Luke. Luke, don't make us get one of our shot clock violations. It's up to you, champ.
All right, here we go. All right, my team's Texas. They're currently last 4 team in the tournament. They're 4-4 in quad 1 games, and 6 of their 9 games are against AP top 25 teams. They got Iowa State coming up on the slate. I love this team. So many seniors. Max A. Smith, the Oral Roberts transfer, has tournament experience. If you are a fan of college basketball, tune into Texas for the next month and a half until they're done for the season. But they have some great wins, and they're going to be a team to watch the rest of the year.
So you've got Texas going on a run here.
Oh, yeah. I think Texas is very good. I think A. Smith scores enough to keep them high, right?
I do love the ace mistake because I do love
He's a hooper.
Teams that have good guards that when the play breaks down, they can just go get a bucket. That's a guy who can go get a bucket. I believe he's the leading Division I scorer right now in terms of career points. I mean, that's a guy
he's been around for 5 years now.
You want on your team late in the game.
He beat Ohio State by himself when he was a sophomore in the tournament. Like, if you have a guy like that and now you're on Texas, 1 + 1 = 2. I like that situation.
Yeah, I mean, he's great. We'll see if Texas can keep it up, but that'll do it for this episode of The Flop Warning. I've been Zion Brown with Cole Noddy and Luke Donovan. Thanks to Owen Graham for producing this episode. Come back on Wednesday for our Women's Wednesday edition of the show. Thanks for listening.